Our discussion topic today is COVID-19 full circle transmission from animals to humans and back again. I hope you guys all like this little title screen. I really enjoy it. The article that we're covering today is an editorial commentary published on April 13th of this year and is titled "The Risk of SARS-CoV-2 Transmission to Pets and Other Wild and Domestic Animals Strongly Mandates a One Health Strategy to Control the COVID-19 Pandemic." I don't want to butcher any of these authors' names, but they are there down below if you'd like to look more into that. So to start off, I'd imagine that some of you are pretty similar with our current understanding of COVID-19, but since it's the main disease of focus in this journal article and our knowledge on the modes of transmission and its mechanisms seem to be ever changing, we thought it was important to preface with a bit of information on it. But please don't be concerned. This won't be like the focus of the rest of the discussion. So SARS-CoV-2, later dubbed coronavirus disease 19 or COVID-19, was, as the name suggests, discovered in 2019 when a cluster of people who attended the wet market in the Hubei province of China became ill with a severe respiratory illness. As of last time I checked, June 24th, 2020, this pandemic has resulted in over 9.5 million infections worldwide. The routes of transmission are not completely identified as of right now. However, it's theorized that the virus is transmitted mainly through respiratory droplets, and more recent observations show that transmission through other means, such as saliva and fomites, are also possible. The close association between humans and their pets has led to the examination of the potential risks of transmission and transmission, as in addition to common habitation, licking and kissing are additional risk factors facilitating transmission between sick people and their companion animals. And I'll pass you on to Priya for the summary.
So the paper that we're presenting here today has an excellent overview of our understanding of the SARS-CoV-2 mechanism, as well as the transmission factors that researchers continue to observe. One of the objectives of this editorial commentary is to note the inventory of risks of SARS-CoV-2 contamination of companion animals by their owners and the potential role of companion animals in the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Viral RNA was also observed in companion animals like dogs and cats at the beginning of the pandemic. However, they were observed to be asymptomatic carriers of the virus. This paper creates an emphasis on the importance of considering the effects of a viral infection in animals and humans in order to launch a better public health response to the novel zoonotic disease. Understanding the disease transmission across species barriers can help us combat these novel crises in the future and prevent them from happening in the first place. A concern is highlighted by a recent experimental study using non-natural conditions that newborn animals were infected with a very high viral load, showing that SARS-CoV-2 has the ability to infect several different pet species. As stated previously, the transmission between animals and humans throughout this pandemic confirmed the zoonotic nature of SARS-CoV-2. However, even though our domesticated animals have been observed to contract the virus, contamination from house animals back to humans was deemed to be very unlikely. Precautionary measures and spreading awareness is a crucial part of our public health response, as cross-species transmission can result in many pet species becoming infected. In the following video that we're going to show, it mentions that despite causes seen in house pets, the transmission from animals back to humans is low.
Okay, so yeah, we're gonna watch a video. It's done by a YouTube channel called Box, which I highly recommend, and it's titled "Why Tigers Get Coronavirus, But Your Dog Will Be Fine." So that will come up right now.
By now, you've probably heard of Nadia the tiger. But if not, allow me to introduce you.
A tiger at a zoo in New York has tested positive for coronavirus.
Researchers think that she caught it from a human zookeeper.
At the zoo, 4-year-old Nadia, her sister Azul, 2 Amir tigers, and 3 lions all developed dry coughs.
Don't worry, Nadia's doing a lot better now. But her illness highlighted something about the virus itself. It's zoonotic. That means it can transmit between humans and animals.
Now the bond between a Pomeranian and its owner may have taken a serious turn.
The study showed Winston, the family's fun-loving pug, contracted COVID-19.
According to the CDC and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 2 cats in separate parts of New York tested positive.
All of this has me wondering, which animals can catch coronavirus? Should I be worried about my pet? I'm Cleo Abram, and this is Answered by Vox.
Well, for most animals that we've seen that can be infected by COVID-19, they don't have very serious symptoms.
That's Dr. William Karish. He's a wildlife veterinarian and an expert on animals and pandemics. I have a dog. Should I be worried about my dog?
No, you should not be worried about your dog. Dogs have been shown in rare cases to pick up the virus, but the virus doesn't grow very well in dogs. People found out that dogs have it just out of curiosity because the people in the homes were very sick. And they thought, well, let's just test the dogs and see if they might have it. And they picked up the virus, but the dogs weren't sick. Cats seem to be more susceptible, and cats can actually infect other cats, but they don't get very sick.
While it is possible for our pets to get very mild cases of COVID-19, the CDC says, quote, the risk of animals spreading COVID-19 to people is considered to be low. So it seems like we can take our pets getting sick or getting us sick off our list of worries. But it's clear that COVID-19 can transmit between humans and animals. So researchers are trying to figure out which animals are most susceptible.
Okay, that's the video there. For this next portion, we're going to go into the discussion. So we're taking clips of the article, different sections of the article on different topics, taking some quotes from there and asking questions based off of those quotes. Okay, so the first few are Priya's questions. So that's on for you, Priya.
This first section of the paper that covers the discovery of 2 dogs and 2 cats testing positive for SARS-CoV-2 states some interesting observations at the beginning of the virus's transmission. So a couple of the quotes I decided to pull from the article was talking about the first dog that was infected, and pretty much the observations found were that the likelihood of an infectious transmission was pretty much non-existent. And also the case of cats were found that they were asymptomatic, and there was pretty much no evidence it had developed a productive and infectious infection. So a question that I found interesting, I was curious to ask was, what are some considerations that you would make when creating a strategy consisting of a One Health perspective to help overcome this global health crisis? An example I came up with, a consideration I would make would pretty much be any adverse effects of certain interventions I would make, or even particular study designs that I would choose, if that is a good prompt for anyone. Okay, so I think I'm gonna just go ahead and give out an answer, but personally, if I were creating creating a strategy, I would make sure when I'm beginning to build this this strategy to overcome the global health crisis, you need to begin from a strong foundation of diverse and interdisciplinary approach. So this would make sure that my team includes people that have vast knowledge in the way that genetics works, in the way that a viral transmission would work, how animals and humans have an interconnected relationship, and pretty much making sure that I begin with a foundation of health professionals that range from many disciplines.
Interesting.
Amazing presentation, guys. I had a thought that if I was considering interventions, I would try to consider like the social and economic effects of introducing those interventions. Maybe especially as it pertains to mental health. I know a lot of people are having trouble with limiting funerals and family celebrations, so that's something that I would consider strongly before introducing any interventions.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Does anybody have any other thoughts on this question, guys?
Yeah, it's very broad, so there are no wrong answers. Any aspect that you think needs to be considered from a One Health perspective.
Just a quick thought, specifically addressing the quotes that are highlighted here. If we're taking a One Health perspective, making sure that pet owners are aware that their pets can be infected, but if they are, the risk to their health is particularly low, but highlighting that this shared intimate environment we have with our pets does pose a risk to both of our health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just the awareness is out there, but not to panic if your dog coughs
Exactly. So factual public health messaging.
Perfect. Okay. If we don't have anyone else, do we want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
I think Catherine has something to say, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I was just thinking I think we're thinking about domestic dogs and domestic cats, but I was wondering in places where animals interact a lot with humans, maybe expanding the perspective more globally, like if there are places where there are a lot of stray dogs or stray cats, and then homelessness is an issue, like what sort of social intervention might you design there to try and limit the spread? Whereas like in my neighborhood, like we have people been letting their dogs off the leashes and the dogs just play with each other. And like, oh my God, like if there's any sort of infection that's on their coats, I'm not worried so much about the dogs, but then your dog has played with somebody else's dog that has been like all over you. And it's kind of like you're in this weird social bubble with somebody else's animal and not just the person. So I think there's just a lot of public health education that would be helpful.
For sure. I think that's a really important perspective to take, especially when there's going to be a lot of intersection of different like animals and the environment, and understanding in what ways that we might be impacting other people or other beings through different interventions.
Okay, perfect. We'll head on to the next one. Is that all right? Okay, that's you too, Priya.
So as the paper continues, the authors express another case of SARS-CoV-2 seen in New York City at the Bronx Zoo. Here, an observation of widespread symptoms were seen after a tiger named Nadia, as mentioned in the video, was tested positive. Despite showing symptoms, the animals that were thought to be infected recovered. However, the paper states not all animals were tested. This questions the importance of considering the effects of a transmissible virus on animals and the environment when their symptoms are observed, yet their recovery is also seen shortly after. So a question I had to this was, if we include animals and the environment in our research involving COVID-19, do you personally feel like that would be an advantage or a disadvantage, and why? Some other prompts I had do you feel like in what ways would this impact humans and the progress that we have on addressing the global pandemic?
All right, I can chime in quick for this one. I think an advantage, considering it is a zoonotic disease, it would be important to consider how it can cross species barriers, where it could mutate in a different animal and come back and maybe have different phenotypic characteristics that can be harmful. A disadvantage, obviously, would be this would be pretty costly to do all these different kind of analyses instead of just focusing on humans alone. So incorporating studies into animals and in the environment would be advantageous, because it would help us better understand the disease and hopefully better prevent something like that from happening in the future. But the disadvantage would be very costly, and you'd need a lot of money for research to do something like that.
That's very true. Yeah.
We've got Simon Jeeves next in line.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, I just really wanted to kind of following up with what Jessica, you were saying. It's a good idea to kind of get more of a whole perspective of what the virus can infect, right? You've stated it's a zoonotic pathogen, right? We don't even know really where it came from for sure to begin with, but it would definitely be an interesting idea to get a whole over-encompassing look at this full range of species that it can infect. Now, at the same time, like you said, that's a lot of money, that's a lot of resources for research, which is still in the middle of an ongoing pandemic, right? I'm sure research with COVID-19 is going to continue for years down the road. And so I think maybe right now resources are better spent trying to control the human side of things, but down the road, that's certainly an important thing to look at.
Yeah, I think that's very true. You don't want to ever look over something and miss crucial details when looking at a viral transmission like this that has affected a lot of different populations.
Valerie posted her question in the chat. So she said her basic question is, how do we know that the first tiger got infected? She would not expect anybody to be cuddling with it.
No. So I'm assuming with the tiger, I'm guessing they put it under and probably did a nasal swab and found that she had the viral RNA that genetically matched coronavirus. I'm confused as to how they got it, because I think they would disclose if the zookeeper had it, but maybe Nadia went on a little venture and caught some COVID. I'm not sure. But yeah, does that answer the question a bit?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to tell since they could be like roaming around other animals, and like there's also visitors to the zoo, so there's just a lot of factors that can be uncontrolled for, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And then I think I would say it's known that you should do an analysis with the zoonotic disease into the animals and environment that it involves, but with the current economy, I'd imagine that it's hard to prioritize things like that when other costs might be more important, more pertinent to cover.
So in this next section of the paper, there's some the paper basically provides some basic understanding of the virus and its transmission modes. It specifies how SARS-CoV-2 has a favorable transmission for human contamination to dogs and cats. This can bring us to think about how, in many ways, quarantining can be terrible for our house pets when we don't take it seriously, or when we allow them to roam around freely outside. Some common habitations we may not think about twice, like licking and kissing, are additional risk factors contributing to the transmission of SARS-CoV-2 between sick people and their pets. A One Health mindset can help individuals perceive the impact and effects of a situation, as you have to consider multiple stakeholders. So a question I had was, what are some aspects of the way our society runs that increases the possibility of human-to-human and human-to-animal viral transmission? So an example I included on the slide was how we have larger city populations, and this creates tighter quarters, whether that's you having to go to the grocery store or even go on for a walk, you end up running into people without meaning to. So yeah, if we don't have to go too far into that, but that's also like a question you can just take home and think about, because it might not be something you end up realizing.
Yeah, I think one thing to think about this is going off of your large city populations. It's hard to get away from people these days, even if you want to. Even the way our buildings are these days, we all live right on top of each other. And some of you may know, as we saw in the SARS, epidemic, I don't think it was a full-blown pandemic, we saw that the disease would travel between floors through ventilation. So that would be something to consider. How much can you really protect yourself when our infrastructure doesn't support barriers for viral transmission?
Yeah. We have a hand up from Olivia, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you guys for your presentation, first of all. And so one, I think, aspect, just coming from like a food safety kind of background, is so the amount of food waste that we generate in Canada is pretty substantial, or just in the world is pretty substantial. And so this leads to like problems such as like rats and raccoons, like in the city. So, and I mean, in these animals that kind of travel around and are quite good at traveling around to get food. So I wonder if, if they also have if they can also transmit the virus from household to household.
Yeah, so that'd definitely be another issue, how the way we're set up, we might have, destroyed wildlife habitat and forced some species to move into the cities and over time, like rats and raccoons. And obviously rats, very famous for the Black Plague. So it would be something to consider, changing it so that these animals aren't necessarily habitating or in habitat with us at the same time. So that's a really awesome perspective, Olivia. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Olivia. We have a couple things in the chat. So from Catherine, she suggested dog parks and enclosed off-leash areas with multiple dogs. And then Andrew mentioned that he has realized that he's been letting his dog kiss and lick his friends, even though he's been socially distanced from them.
Oh, no.
I think just looking at socioeconomic factors is going to be really important when we analyze different prevalence and risk in our population. So things such as communal living spaces for lower income residences, and I think Catherine mentioned homeless populations and how they can share intimate spaces with their pets 24 hours of the day. So just keeping things like that in mind.
Yeah. It can be a lot of like things you don't think about on a daily basis, and it's very unconsciously that you just do certain tasks. So that's a really good perspective. Yeah.
So I'll move on to, I believe this is my question. So this was a section of the paper titled Coronaviruses Infecting Humans and Carnivores Are Phylogenetically Closely Related. And the interesting quote that I pulled from that was, to date, only 7 coronaviruses have been reported in humans, 4 of which are ubiquitous with seasonal circulation and mostly causing relatively mild colds. And then it lists the 4 there on the slide. The other 3 of more recent zoonotic origin are associated with severe acute respiratory syndromes, namely SARS, MERS, and now SARS-CoV-2. So a little factoid, before 2003, 2 human coronaviruses were known to cause mild illnesses. The outbreak of SARS and MERS have flipped the coin to reveal how devastating and life-threatening a human coronavirus infection could be. As, before 2003, these weren't considered to be a serious virus, as you'd only get cold-like symptoms. But obviously, in recent years, with the development of SARS, MERS, and SARS-CoV-2, they're obviously treated a lot more serious now. So my question for all of you is, why do you think novel zoonotic viruses, such as the novel human coronaviruses, have had more of a devastating impact when compared to their earlier sister viruses? And I can kick this off quickly with a little answer I came up with. I think like changes in our ecosystem, like such as global warming, habitat destruction, and destruction of biodiversity, brings together species that may have not been introduced in the past, and we're bringing them under more dense conditions. So the chance of zoonotic pathogens developing and spreading and mutating between different species and organisms has all increased, of the chance of there being new novel viruses introduced into our ecosystems. So we're obviously not well prepared to handle these. I believe those sister viruses, the earlier ones that were less threatening, were discovered in like 1960. And before that, we didn't really have too much, like we didn't have the best research tools back then. So they could have been around for who knows hundreds of years, but it's in recent years that they have mutated. And I think that might be because different ecosystems, environments, humans and animals are interacting today that are different than they did in the past. And it's too fast for people or animals to evolve and adapt to such a change. So what do you guys think of that?
I think that perspective, Jessica, is one that we should take into account a lot more often. I think we forget to realize that humans' advancement in society has been very quick, and just like you said, like we've been encroaching in a lot of spaces that animals have claimed to before, and so now it's becoming a very I guess you can say like mixed environment and mixed space that we're sharing, but sort of also like just not giving space to animals. So this virus could have evolved in so many different ways just because of the way that we are currently treating the spaces that we're sharing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. Do we have anybody else that wanted to add to that one?
We do have a question from a guest, and he's wondering if there's been any research surrounding plants being infected by COVID-19. Have you read anything about that?
Well, I'm not sure how plant viruses work, but I know that should the coronavirus somehow mutate and have a genetic sequence that will bind to any kind of receptor on a plant, it is possible for succulents to get infected. I don't think that's researched quite heavily, but who knows, your succulents could be coming after you. I would take caution in approaching your succulents because you never know. Just maybe socially distance for now if that is a concern of yours. So SARS-CoV-2 may jump the species barrier easily, another section of the paper. So the quote I chose from that is, the diversity of species susceptible to SARS-CoV and SARS-CoV-2 related viruses strongly suggests a propensity of these viruses to cross the species barrier, particularly in the context of the frequent encounters between carnivores and other small mammals that may facilitate interspecies transmission. Human coronavirus infection is a zoonosis, and understanding the zoonotic origins of human coronaviruses would serve us well. The intermediate reservoir hosts for some coronaviruses are also known. Identifying the animal host has a direct implication in the prevention of these human diseases. So my question for all of you, based off of those two statements, is how may one use a One Health approach to prevent a zoonotic disease-based novel health crisis from developing in the future? What aspects of the ways humans and animals interact with their environments needs to be changed, and how? So Priya's previous question was like, what are we currently doing that's not okay? But this question is more, what do you think we could change in the way our society runs? Because obviously, from a One Health perspective, from a public health perspective, we can't be going back to a new normal after this, because obviously the probability of another zoonotic disease creeping in is higher than it used to be. So I'm just wondering what you guys think would be different ways that we could change the way our societies run, or different things that you've seen that have been implemented so that these, the ability for the diseases to transmit like this are decreased. I can start this one off. So I was kind of thinking discouraging interaction with animals or consumption of non-typically consumed animal species, like what happened in the Wuhan wet market. Increasing food production safety, like Olivia was saying earlier. Separation of human and animal environments, which would mean that we kind of make it so it's less easy for animals to creep into our environments, as well as less destruction of animal habitats to prevent unnatural migration into human habituated grounds. And then obviously, like Olivia said earlier, keeping cities clean to prevent animals from encroaching into our subways, systems, and anywhere that they can find trash to eat. Yeah, and then saying again, global warming has had an impact on the migration patterns of animals. And it could result in other novel species of animals entering into grounds that they were never habitating before. And they could also produce a disease between those animals if one animal gets infected with two different kinds of virus strains. So anybody like to add to that?
Hi, yeah, it was just to comment on what you were saying about interaction and eating of other animals. It's, you know, here in North America, it's a common thing that we eat farm-raised animals, and there's very strenuous protocols on how those are raised and distributed. But in places like Africa, where we see, you know, time after time, there's outbreaks of Ebola viruses, and although we haven't determined exactly where they come from, it's a deeply rooted cultural practice that there's eating of wild animals like bats, which are known to be reservoirs of many different zoonotic viruses, non-human primates. And so you got to think, I don't know what you'd say about how difficult it is to change those deeply rooted cultural practices.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult because I'm in animal bio, and you do learn about like agricultural production systems. And obviously in Canada and States, we're pretty strict, even more strict in Canada. But obviously, it'd be hard to force other countries to act in good faith and do the same thing because it might be due to cost. You know, I know that the wet markets in China started because there was a famine, and the government allowed them to hunt their own meals or for their own meat. So that's kind of where that started. So I think it really comes down to a systematic issue where we have to make it so that other countries, I guess, have enough money to harvest things properly, to have these safe procedures. But that can't happen until other people have like the privilege that we do here, the privilege that we do, that we can have food safety and not be concerned about where we're going to get our next meal. So yeah, a very, very deep-rooted issue for sure.
I just wanted to add to that, Jessica. I think a lot of that, in terms of having a One Health approach and perspective, a lot of that can really happen when you involve yourself with like the community and you really make sure that you're present for like policy changes and town hall meetings and things like that, where you're able to really voice your concerns. I know in Mississauga, which is where I live, like there's a lot of plannings that are going on to increase the amount of green space that's available currently. And that's again to like help create that distinction between there's like space for animals and also space for us in the environment. And making sure that we're not just encroaching on those spaces and taking away, and that which will end up leading to viruses and diseases like these today. So again, like I think that's a great perspective, and we need to like keep sort of pushing the different methods that we can really strategize and that will end up creating better solutions.
Yeah, that's an awesome perspective. So acknowledging that's a systematic issue, and then but taking the political route and vote for people who are going to make these changes in your own people who care about public health, people who care about public health funding, people who care about maintaining environments. Those are all very important things to consider.
For sure.
Go ahead, Said.
Well, first of all, thanks for the interesting presentation. So I just wanted to talk from the urban design perspective. So I was just thinking that the way we design our urban spaces is going to have an important impact on the level of interactions between human to human and human to animals. So I just think that in the future of designing of urban spaces, we need to concentrate on lower density, and which is going to decrease the chance of transmission of the virus between human to human or human to animal. I don't think we have a very big problem with density here in Canada because it's a very, very big country and it's not very populated. But in places like Europe or China, I think we have this challenge to overcome.
Yeah, so I'm loving all these different perspectives because it really is the One Health approach, transdisciplinary action. So we're getting the political side. Like you said, we need city planners and architects to plan this as well, and working with ecologists and animal biologists to understand, and wildlife conservationists to understand how to structure our society so that it's a symbiotic relationship with all three factors of One Health: animals, environment, and people. So that's a really great perspective. Thank you for adding that. Okay, and we'll go on to the last one. So this section was titled Genetic Characteristics with High Evolutionary Potential. I took two quotes from this one. So the RNA genome of coronavirus is one of the largest known, ranging in size from 2,700 to, or 27,000 to 31,000 nucleotides. The genome's large size promotes the appearance of point mutations, deletions, or insertions, which can sometimes lead to the emergence of new variants with different phenotypic characteristics. And the high prevalence of dog infections with canine coronaviruses in Europe might foster recombination with SARS-CoV-2 if an animal were infected with both viruses. Such an event, if it were to happen, could lead to the emergence of a new coronavirus with unpredictable phenotypic characteristics. So based on these quotes from the paper, interception of human-animal transmission is crucial in preventing mutation of novel zoonotic viruses such as COVID-19. So my question for you is, what are some of the implications of issuing a response against a rapidly mutating virus? So what considerations do you have to make against a rapidly mutating virus? Obviously, one to consider is that it has to be dealt with quickly, because since it does have a very high mutation rate, higher than what humans have, much higher than that, exponentially higher than that, then obviously the response would have to be quick and swift, so that there is no opportunity for, say, two viruses to enter a dog and mutate, a virus to enter a person, the person gets contracted with another virus, those mutate together or recombine. So I was wondering, like, what factors would have to be considered with a mutating virus like this, and what you guys think of that. If anybody has a bit of a genetics aspect or any other kind of perspective on it. I know this is a bit more of a complicated question. So one thing I think I could consider is looking at like vaccines, antiviral drugs. So if one implication of this dealing with a rapidly mutating virus is that vaccines rely on tricking the body into making antibodies against a certain virus by taking on a form that resembles said virus. So should that individual be infected with the real thing, the body is already reared to mount an immune response and produce targeting antibodies immediately. However, with a fast mutating disease like coronavirus, mutated versions of the virus won't be recognized by these antibodies, allowing it to fully infect the individual. So this is an issue because once the vaccine is finally made, it may be deemed useless in individuals with a mutated form of the virus, which is why the disease needs to be eradicated from the population it dwells in before it can undergo these mutations. So obviously it takes a lot of time to make a vaccine, but that's a consideration when making a vaccine, is that it might not work for everybody because might work for Joe, but Sally has a mutated version of the same virus, and the antibodies won't work against the virus. The virus essentially hides from those antibodies. Can anybody think of why that would be an issue maybe with testing? With testing for the virus, why mutating virus might be an issue?
Jessica, if I could just add into that, I think that's a great prompt for the testing perspective, because if you go into hospital and they're testing for one specific type of the virus, then it's very possible that the virus can mutate and they'll completely miss a newly mutated virus just because they're looking for very specific attributes or characteristics of the original virus. So again, like I think when you begin testing or even like researching for a solution or a vaccine, it's important to sort of be able to attribute general symptoms and then move from there, and be able to have that open mindset that because it can easily mutate, there are many different characteristics and attributes that you need to be able to look out for.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think as well from like a public health side, since there could be potentially a lot of false positives or false negatives, with a false positive, you don't necessarily, that'd be an issue because you don't want to concern the individual with them thinking that they do have something severe like the coronavirus. And then with something like a false negative, you don't want a sick person going home and then not receiving treatment. So it would definitely be important to find different ways of testing, or even if they're testing negative but they have the symptoms, to carry on with treatment as usual. Just to prevent any kind of person getting sick with thinking that they're healthy, or going around and seeing other people and spreading the disease because they thought they're healthy. Meanwhile, they were actually positive in the first place. Do we have any hands, Tanya?
We do, yep. Olivia, if you'd like to go ahead.
I just had, I guess, sort of like a question that I guess like for the frame. So what, I guess, I'm kind of wondering, what is the likelihood that it will mutate?
The likelihood from the papers I've read is it's pretty high. It's not like a crazy mutation rate, but it's definitely higher than the base mutation rate that humans have. So spreading between humans, it does have like a decent chance to mutate, unfortunately. However, since like in things like tests, they look for a very specific sequence, I'd say the chances of that specific sequence getting mutated aren't as high. So even though the entire virus might have different kind of mutations, it might not affect the phenotypic characteristics or the ability for tests to pick that up. But the other issue is, say, a person gets infected with the common cold, what is that, papillovirus, something like that, and then also a coronavirus. Those could recombine together and create a whole new virus with different phenotypic characteristics. So that's another consideration to make, that even if it doesn't mutate, it could recombine during its replication, and that would obviously wouldn't be so good if that creates a novel virus that's even more deadly than the one we currently have.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. That was a great question. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for your time. It was a pleasure. I had a lot of fun preparing for this and learning a bit more about this, and I hope everybody has learned something today. Priya, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun like putting this together with Jessica, and this has been a great discussion with the questions that we've gotten and the sort of the answers we've been able to rebuttal back and forth. So I hope that we can see more of you in future discussions.